Hello. Um, it's February the 5th, 2021, almost 9 o'clock at night, and this is an introduction to an interesting tool I found. It's an IFR simulator, also could be called a VOR trainer or simulator. This one has VOR and ADF. ADF stands for Automatic Direction Finding, which we'll talk about another time. ADF is used for HF frequency. It's a leftover from the 1930s. There still are ADF stations around, not as many as there used to be, but especially in foreign countries and in the third world, and they still have their value. But we're going to be focusing on VOR navigation. If you look at the screen, we're going to start with the instruments, and I will mouse around here to show you understand what I'm talking about. So up in the upper left hand corner we have we can add a VOR, we can add an NDB, you can load a text list if you make a text list, but it doesn't come with one. Down below there is a box where it will show you the type, the ID, and the frequency of your nav aid, your navigation aid, and right now we're not worried about mission. Down in the lower left here, you have a few options. We can show the compass or not show the compass around the airplane. We'll leave that turned on. If you look at the airplane in the center of the screen, and that represents you, you can show that compass or not. We'll leave it on. It's a good aid. We're not going to pay attention to fixed ADF right now. Auto turn means I'm going to turn that off. I found that a little annoying, and I'll talk about what that does. But you use your right and left arrow keys on the keyboard to turn the aircraft, and then there's wind under that, but I'm not adding any wind. And underneath there's your radios. Now this trainer only has one nav radio and one, well, we won't talk about comms. Most aircraft will have two nav radios, nav 1 and nav 2. They'll also have two comm radios, and this is accurate. They have an active frequency and a standby frequency, and the button in the middle switches the frequencies. And so if you have two nav radios in your aircraft, and you have you have an active and standby for each radio, you can have up to 4 different frequencies all ready to go when you need them. So for instance, on your comm radio you could have the tower frequency on the left where you're talking to the tower, and maybe departure control on the right. So as soon as you're done taking off and departing the aircraft, the vicinity of the airport, you can just hit the button when it's time to switch to the departure frequency, etc. So it's very handy to have. Again, we're not going to pay any attention to ADF. DME, distance measuring equipment, this is where you'll get a readout. If you are using a VOR DME, which many of them are, it means you not only will get bearing information, you will get distance measuring equipment. Will give you an estimated distance to the VOR. Pretty accurate enough for our purposes. If a VOR does have a DME, you don't have to tune that in separately. It's under the same frequency as the VOR nav beacon, so you'll automatically get the DME information if it's there. Okay, so now we have this screen in the center, this large field. In the center of the screen is our aircraft. Now that's you, and right now you are pointed north. Now that's important to keep that distinct from the VOR bearings. Apparently some people get those confused. So the VOR is, and we'll talk about that, is like spokes on a wagon wheel. So VOR has a fixed 360 lines that radiate out from the VOR, starting with 0, which radiates from the VOR northward, all the way around to 180, which radiates due south of the VOR, etc. Okay, and that's not to be confused with your aircraft heading. And that's why this trainer is so valuable, because it'll help you figure those two things out. Now, there's the gauges on the bottom. We're not going to pay any attention to this one on the left. That's ADF. But we will. This is our course direction indicator in the middle, our gyro, if you will. Okay, CDI. You can rotate the heading bug by putting your mouse over the heading knob and rotating the wheel on the mouse. Okay, it rotates 1 degree at a time. Now, the actual bug doesn't do anything. There's no autopilot here, but it's a good reference if you want to mark a course. The course you want to refer to or something. Otherwise, you could just leave it in the middle. It's up to you. If you want to move that bug any faster, you can hold down the Shift key and roll your mouse button, and it moves 5 degrees at a time. On the right, this is the heart of what we're going to be working with, and what we will be doing when we start flying this weekend. And this is the OBS knob. It works exactly the same as the heading bug. You hold your mouse over it, roll the wheel, and it moves 1 degree at a time. If you hold down the Shift key, it moves 5 degrees at a time, so it's much faster that way. Okay, that's your course. Your rough tuning, and then your fine tuning. Okay, so let's look at the VOR. Number one, if you have this little barber pole in the middle, it means you have no signal at all. You don't have a signal. That's common if you're on the ground. Well, it's certainly common if you have not tuned in a VOR station. It'll show that flag. If you're still on the airport tarmac and you're flying from Oceana to Kitty Hawk, and you've tuned in the Kitty Hawk VOR, but you're still on the runway, you will probably not get a signal while you're on the ground. You're too low. This is VHF frequencies, and I believe the DME is UHF. But the VHF frequencies, are mostly line of sight, so trees and things will be in the way. Once you gain altitude, and the higher up you are, the better your odds for picking up that signal farther out. Some of these VORs can be picked up more than 100 miles out. My experience is frequently you'll pick them up around 70 miles. But again, it depends how high you're flying and a lot of things. And what kind of VOR it is, how powerful it is. Okay, so the VOR, so you have the barber pole, that means no signal. You have this. This is really the heart of this whole thing, this little needle in the middle. And by the way, this needle, these dots are here for a reason. If memory serves me correctly, each dot represents 1 mile to the left or the right. This needle represents your track to the VOR, and if the needle is 2 ticks over here, means you're 2 miles to the right of the track, and you need to come left. Pretty sure that's how that works. Then you have your to from. Notice the to from arrows. Both to and from have an arrow, which is another way to know right now you have no signal. Okay, so you don't get confused. To and from is important. So if you think about a VOR like a wagon wheel, where the VOR is at the hub, and the wagon wheel has spokes. When you tune into a VOR, you can adjust this dial to the particular spoke you want to intersect, and follow that spoke into the center of the wheel, which would be the hub. Or you can also fly away from the hub on a particular spoke. Okay, so let's get to work here. We're going to make this very simple to start with. I'm going to move our airplane to the far right, and I'm going to put them up near the top. Now we need an NDB, or excuse me, a VOR. So I'm going to come up here and click on Add a VOR. I'm in the upper left-hand corner, and it's going to ask me the type. So I guess we don't get to choose that. It's a VOR DME. Its ID is Charlie Sierra Uniform, and its frequency is 108. Now, I could come down here and dial that. I don't know how I dial that in. I guess I can dial it in somehow. But the easy way to do this is to just click on this, and it puts the 108 right in your standby frequency. Okay, but before I tune the frequency, before I hit this button in the middle and tune 108 to my active frequency, I'm going to move this VOR up a little bit. Okay, so this is cool. You can move your airplane wherever you want to start this problem here, and you can move this VOR here. So let's say this VOR is roughly 20 miles west of me, and the runway, this VOR is at an airfield, and the approach heading for the runway is runway 27. So I want to be heading 270 as I approach the airfield. So so in this, well, all right. Before we get to that, let's first figure out from where we are. The first problem we'll solve is, how do I head directly towards this VOR? So I'm going to start the program running now. And you start, your throttle is your up and down arrow keys on your keyboard, and your rudder turns are the left and right arrows on your keyboard. Pretty simple. That's the 4 arrows down there on the lower right of your keyboard, right next to your number pad. So if I hit the up arrow, I'm going to add a little throttle. Start my airplane is now moving. All right, so here's what I want to do. All I want to do right now is head straight for the VOR. So before I head off into nowhere land here, I'm gonna reverse course. So I'm holding the left arrow key now, and I'm gonna reverse course to the south, because I know I want to steer 270 anyway. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my, I'm going to hit the down arrow, which removes the throttle and essentially pauses the problem for me. You can't do that when you're flying, but we're in a simulator, so we can do this. So I want to go from this airplane where I am right now straight to this VOR, and the question is, how would I do that? So and what I have to do is I have to turn the heading. I have to turn this, well, right now, the first thing I need to do is come over here to my radio and make 108 my active frequency. You'll notice as soon as I did that, a couple things happened here. One, my little barber pole window went black. It means I have a signal. And the other thing it's telling me is right now I'm heading from. Actually, I'm really almost heading neither, because I'm running perpendicular to the VOR, but close enough. It says I'm heading from, and the reason it says I'm heading from is because of the bearing I have. So I'm going to turn the OBS knob, okay, to until, so it looks to me like my course to the VOR should be somewhere around 250, 260. So I'm going to turn my OBS to the left. I'm going to hold down the shift key and make it a course turn here. And I'm going to keep turning it until that needle centers itself. You'll notice the little arrow is now pointing to the 2, meaning that I am in the half of the dial here that's towards the VOR. All right, bingo, here we are. Well, you can't get much more accurate than that. So the course, it's telling me that I need to steer, looks like about 257 or 8 straight to the VOR. All right, so I'm going to turn the aircraft to the right to 257. I'm going to start the program up again. I'm just going to give it a little bit of throttle. And then I'm going to steer to the right to 257 roughly, And that should. Now, if you look at the VOR says, if I want the 257 radial, I'm a little bit right of track. Not much, but just a little bit. So I'm going to steer to the left just a hair. And watch that needle should start centering itself as I approach my radial. You know, I'm pretty close here, so, and we're going to watch that needle and see if it's getting closer or farther away. I'm going to come left another notch. So now I'm at about 248. Oh, you know what? I'm already left of track. There's my bad. I need to come right a little bit. See, you need to chase the needle on this. So if the needle is to the right, you want to come right. That's showing you're where the center of this gauge is, right there. If that needle is to the right of the center of the gauge, that means you're left of track and you need to come right. So that was my mistake. Come right a little more. That should start closing us now. We'll come to almost west. And I think the needle's starting to come back towards the middle. All right. Remember, the target course is 256 or so, 257. Now, if I stayed on this course, eventually I would end up to the right of my track. I'd cross over the track, but I don't want to. So I'm just about there now. I'm just about on track. So now I'm going to come back over to that 257 course right around there. And that should hold me pretty well. And I'm headed straight for the VOR. Now, remember, in the real world, you wouldn't see the VOR. You know where your airplane is. You know what course you're heading. The VOR would be on the map, and you should have some idea where you are. So, all right. So that's how you steer towards the VOR. Now, suppose instead of heading towards the VOR, well, we'll get to that the away part next. All right. So let's try another scenario here. I'm going to take my throttle off now to stop the motion. I'm going to put our aircraft up here again. Let's go back to our original scenario where this VOR Charlie Sierra uniform is at an airport. And we're heading roughly south. And I want to approach this VOR on a heading of 270 because that's the runway heading. So I want to be pretty much lined up with that runway when I get there. Well, that's easy. We saw how you find the bearing to the VOR. I can tell you what the bearing is to the VOR from where I am right now by turning this knob. And so I'm still at about 255. But I don't want 255. I want to pick up the 270 spoke coming out of that VOR. Okay? So there's this line right there. Even though you can't see it, there's a line that's coming out of the VOR going directly east. And that, of course, when you're going towards the VOR, is the 270 radial. I want that radial because this is what I want my flight path to be, straight towards that VOR at 270, but I'm up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to intersect that radial. So I have set 270 into my VOR. It's 2, that checks, okay? And I'm going to fly pretty much due south now until I get very close to that VOR. Then I'm going to turn to pick it up and head straight in. So let's try that out. Here we go. I'm adding a little speed now. Add some throttle. This is a slow airplane. I'll give it a little more throttle. All right, so we're heading south. Now, as I continue to head south, you should see the needle. So according to this, 1, 2, 3, 4.5 miles. I'm 4.5 miles to the right of my track. Okay, so I can tell from this how now I'm 3 miles right of track, and I'm closing in on my track. I'm going to slow this down now, so it's not so fast. Notice there's a DME over here on the left, 3.8 miles. It's not changing much, of course, because we're just heading perpendicular to the radial. But once we turn towards the airfield, I'm going to pick up speed a little bit again here to close this. Alright, so once I get close to my turn, I'll slow down again. So here I come. Alright, I'm now only a half a mile, and I'm slowing down my speed, and I'm going to start my turn to the right to 270. Okay, so there I am. I'm on 270. Looks now like I'm pretty good. Maybe just a skosh to the left of track, but that's okay. We're in pretty good shape. Now that error, as I get closer to the VOR, will become a little more magnified as you get closer and closer to your objective. All right, I'm going to increase speed now. If you look at the DME, we're closing pretty quickly. We're headed straight for the airfield at Charlie Sierra Uniform, VOR frequency 108. And my DME is counting down the distance. See how that works? Now I'm just a hair left of my track, so I'm going to give it just a skosh of right rudder here and try to get back over a little closer onto my track. Now there is no wind in this problem. If you added a wind direction and strength, because in reality it's very unusual to fly with no wind, but we're not going to worry too much about that right now. So hopefully you're getting the idea of how this works. And you'll see your airplane, the Cessna 152, will have all of these instruments. It'll have the DME readout. It'll have the Nav Radio showing you active and standby frequencies. All you have to do is plug in the frequency of the VOR that you're going to. That should be on our flight plan, hopefully. All right, I'm going to skosh back to west here because I'm back on my track. And I am pretty much bingo on a 270 radial right into the VOR. And I'm only now 17 miles out. So you get the idea. Okay, let's stop this and reset, and let's try one more scenario. Here's another scenario. We're going to now, here's CSU, our fictional airport. I want to take off from CSU, and then I'm taking off on runway 36, so I'm going north. Let's say I've just taken off, and then I want to head outbound from the airport on a radial. Whoops, it's not letting me put it right over there. There we go, close enough. Let's say we want to head outbound on an outbound radial. So let's do. I'll tell you what. Let's do this. Let's pretend CSU is Oceana Naval Air Station, and let's say there's a VOR DME at Oceana. And I'm going to, now I can do this on a map. I don't necessarily have to have a VOR at my destination. If I know Oceana has a VOR that I can follow outbound, and I know that Kitty Hawk is southeast 55 miles, let's say Kitty Hawk bears about 160 from Oceania, then I could, then, it's not going to let me put that right on top of it. I could then turn my OBS to 160. Now I'm going to hold down the shift key because that's going to make this faster. There. Okay, so that's about 160 right now, okay? And I'm actually pretty close to that radio, but you'll see I'm not right on it. So let's start the problem and say, okay, I've taken off. I'm exiting the pattern. My airplane is moving, and I need to come left because I need to intersect that VOR path. So I know I'm going to have to steer something to the left of 160. We'll try 140. Now I should be closing in on my 160 radial. I'll come left a little more. We'll try 130. All right, so imagine that radial now that's coming out of here, 160, and I'm closing. Whoa, I'm closing in on it really fast, aren't I? Pretty close. All right, so now I'm actually I'm a little left of my track, so I need to come right just a hair to close track. And there I am. Okay, so I am now on the 160 outbound radial from Oceania headed towards Kitty Hawk. And if I watch my DME down here in the lower left corner of the screen, I can see that I'm 12 miles out, and when I get to 55 miles out, I should be just about over Kitty Hawk. So I hope this helps. There are other things you can do. Let me give you one more quickie, and then we'll call it a night here. All right, so I'm going to move this guy back up pretty close to the 160 again. I'm going to add another VOR. I'm going to add a VOR. Now I have a separate VOR, and that separate VOR is WYF, and it's 114.6. Okay, and it's over here. Now, let's say I've got myself all set up now. I'm on that 160 VOR. I'm going to go ahead and start moving again. And I want to know when I cross, let's just say that when I get to Kitty Hawk, I know that the bearing from WYF is going to be bearing about, let's just say, when WYF bears 240. So now that I've established, well, let's get back on our. We were doing so well there. Let's see if I can get back on that. There we go. Okay, so we're on our way now. We're on that 160 outbound radio from CSU. I know that when the bearing line from WYF is 240, when I'm bearing 240 from WYF, I should be at Kitty Hawk. So one thing I can do is switch the frequencies now. I'm going to change to the frequency for WYF, and I'm going to tune it to 240 because that's my intersection. That's my intersecting bearing. Okay, so there's 240 now. Eventually, and I can cycle back between these frequencies, so I can cycle back to 108 Of course, it doesn't do me any good because now I'm on 240. So eventually, you're gonna start seeing this needle come over, and I'm gonna intersect 240. Remember, I'm still on the 160 outbound radial from CSU, and I'm trying to intersect on the outbound 240 from WYF. Now, don't forget, I could have done the inbound 260 too if I wanted, but it doesn't matter. Same end result. So here we are. Pretty soon we should be getting close to that radial. Unless I got too steep an angle here. Now, most airplanes will have 2 nav radios and 2 comm radios, and they'll often have two VOR needles, so you can actually have both of those set up ahead of time. Alright, so here we are. You'll notice that I am now bearing, I'm going to stop the problem here. My airplane is now bearing 240 from WYF, 160 from CSU, and I should be at my destination. Okay, so I hope that helps. I'm going to send you a link to this. It's ferganez.net projects VOR Simulator. And if you want to play with it, you can. I recommend you do. I think you'll find it pretty interesting. Oh, here's that help. You can push the help button there, close it out. Okay. And that tells you all the controls and everything. So once I couldn't figure out how you get back to that from inside the program. It's over here. All right. Have a great evening. Bye.